They said I would never succeed. My own family laughed, judged, and pushed me out like I was nothing. I left with no money, no support, just silence and pain that followed me every night. But I didn't break. I built. Years later, my phone rang. It was them. The same voices, now asking for help. Funny, right? The failure became their only hope. So tell me, would you help them or walk away? Comment your choice. I still remember the exact moment everything flipped. It wasn't loud. It wasn't dramatic. It was just a phone ringing in a quiet room. And somehow, that sound felt heavier than every word they had ever thrown at me. Because the name on the screen? It was my father. The same man who once looked me in the eyes and said, "You will never succeed." And just like that, everything came rushing back. The laughter. The judgment. The cold silence at the dinner table. Every look that made me feel small. Every word that made me question if I was enough. You know that feeling, right? When the people who are supposed to believe in you don't? When home doesn't feel like home anymore. Yeah, that was my reality. But here's the part they never expected. I didn't break. Not completely. Sure, I cried. I doubted myself. I questioned every decision. There were nights I almost gave up, nights I stared at the ceiling wondering if they were right about me. But something inside me refused to stay down. Something quiet, but stubborn. So I kept going. Step by step. Failure after failure. Rejection after rejection. No applause. No support. Just me, and the voice in my head that slowly got louder than theirs. And eventually, things started to change. Slowly at first. Then all at once. And that's where it gets interesting. Because the moment I finally built something real, something they said I never could, everything shifted. The silence turned into curiosity. The distance turned into attention. And the people who once ignored me, they started watching. Closely. But nothing could have prepared me for that call. Because when I picked up, I didn't hear the same man anymore. His voice was different. Hesitant. Careful. Almost unsure. And then he said it. "Harper, we need your help." Yeah, let that sink in. The girl they called a failure had become their only option. So how does something like that even happen? How does a girl they once dismissed become the person they depend on? I asked myself that question the second I hung up the phone. Because that call wasn't just unexpected, it was unreal. Just a few years ago, I was invisible in their eyes. Now suddenly, I mattered? But let me take you back for a second. Picture this. A dinner table. Perfectly set. Quiet, but tense. My father at the head, my mother watching every word, my brother sitting there like he had already won at life. And me? Sitting there, trying to breathe, trying to speak, trying to be seen. That was the version of me they knew. The one who hesitated. The one who doubted. The one they could control. So what changed? Was it luck? Timing? Or something deeper? Because success doesn't just appear out of nowhere. It builds in silence. It grows in moments no one else sees. And, trust me, there were a lot of those moments. Nights when I questioned everything. Days when I felt like quitting would be easier. Seconds where I almost believed them. But here's where it gets interesting. Because the same pressure that was supposed to break me started shaping me instead. Every insult? Fuel. Every rejection? Direction. Every time they said, "You can't?" It echoed in my head until it turned into, "Watch me." And still, none of that explains the call. None of that explains why the same people who pushed me away came back. Something must have happened. Something big enough to flip everything upside down. Because people don't just change overnight. Especially not like that. So ask yourself this. What would it take for someone to swallow their pride and come back to the person they once looked down on? What kind of situation forces that kind of shift? Because whatever it was, it didn't just change them. It changed everything. And to understand why that moment mattered so much, you need to understand me. Not the version they see now, but the girl I used to be. My name is Harper. I'm 27 years old, born and raised in a typical American family that looked perfect from the outside. Nice house, stable careers, clean reputation. The kind of family people admire without asking questions. But behind that image, things felt very different. Because in that house, everything had a standard. Success had a definition. And love? It felt conditional. You earned it, or you lost it. Simple as that. My father was a lawyer, disciplined, logical, always right. My mother was a teacher, calm on the surface, but quietly controlling in ways that were hard to explain. And my brother? He was everything they wanted. Smart, confident, predictable, the golden child. And then there was me. I didn't fit the mold. I wasn't the best student. I didn't care about law or stability. I didn't dream about a safe life. I loved creativity, writing, storytelling. I wanted something different, something uncertain. And in that house, different wasn't exciting. It was unacceptable. At first, it was subtle. Small comments, disapproving looks, comparisons that felt harmless until they weren't. Why can't you be more like your brother? You need to be realistic. That's not a real career. You hear those things enough, they start to stick. And slowly I changed. Not on the outside, but inside. I started doubting myself before anyone else could. I started shrinking in rooms where I used to speak. I started believing that maybe, just maybe, they were right about me. But here's the part no one saw. Even while I was doubting myself, a small part of me refused to disappear. A quiet voice that kept asking, what if they're wrong? It wasn't loud. It wasn't confident. But it was there. And it stayed. And that tiny voice? It would eventually become the reason everything changed. And that's exactly where the real problem began. Because it wasn't just about being different. It was about what that difference cost me, every single day. At first, I thought I could handle it. Ignore the comments. Smile through the tension. Pretend it didn't hurt. But the truth? It did. More than I ever admitted. Because in that house, every choice I made felt like a mistake in their eyes. Every opinion I had felt wrong before I even spoke it. Imagine walking into a room and already knowing you don't belong there. Imagine being surrounded by people and still feeling completely alone. That was my normal. And the worst part? It wasn't one big moment. It was constant. Small cuts over and over again. A look. A sigh. A sentence dropped casually that stayed in my head for days. You're not serious. You'll regret this. You're not like us. Those words didn't just hurt, they built something inside me. Doubt. Quiet, heavy, impossible to ignore. And slowly, without realizing it, I started seeing myself the way they saw me. Not enough. Not capable. Not meant to succeed. But here's where it gets dangerous. Because when enough people repeat the same story about you, it starts to feel like truth. Even when it's not. And that's exactly what happened. I began shrinking my dreams before they could destroy them. I started questioning every step before I even took it. And still, that small voice inside me didn't disappear. It got quieter, yes, but not gone. And every time I heard them say, "You're going to fail," something inside me reacted. Not loudly, not confidently, but enough to make me pause. Because deep down, I wasn't afraid of failing. I was afraid they might be right. And that fear? That's what almost stopped me before I even started. And if you looked at my family from the outside, none of this would make sense. Because to everyone else, we were perfect. The kind of family people point to and say, that's what success looks like. A beautiful house in a quiet neighborhood. Clean lawns. Organized dinners. Smiles at every social event. Everything looked right. Everything felt controlled. But that was the image. And the image had rules. In our house, there was a silent expectation behind everything. You didn't just live, you performed. You didn't just choose, you followed a path that was already decided. And if you stayed on that path, you were praised. You were accepted. You belonged. But if you stepped off it, even slightly, you felt it immediately. Not always through shouting. Not always through punishment. Sometimes it was quieter than that. A pause in conversation. A look exchanged between my parents. A subtle shift in tone that said, without words, "You're disappointing us." And trust me, that was enough. Because over time, I learned exactly what they wanted. Stability. Respectable careers. Predictable futures. My father believed in logic, structure, certainty. My mother believed in reputation, appearances, doing what was right. And together, they built a world where success had only one definition. There was no space for risk. No space for creativity. No space for uncertainty. And definitely no space for me. At first, I tried to adjust. I really did. I told myself maybe they were right. Maybe I should change. Maybe if I followed their rules, everything would feel easier, safer, better. But every time I tried to fit in, something inside me pushed back. Every time I imagined living the life they wanted for me, I felt this tightness in my chest. Like I was slowly disappearing. Like I was trading something real for something acceptable. And that's when it hit me. This wasn't just pressure. It was control. Not loud. Not obvious, but constant. And the more I noticed it, the harder it became to ignore. And if the pressure inside that house wasn't enough, there was always one more thing that made it worse. My brother. The perfect example of everything I was not. He didn't have to try. At least, that's how it looked. Straight A's. Clear goals. A future that made sense to everyone. When he spoke, people listened. When he succeeded, everyone celebrated. It was simple, clean, predictable. And then there was me, standing right next to him. Every achievement of his became a silent comparison. Every compliment he received echoed like a reminder of what I lacked. Why can't you be more like him? That sentence didn't come once. It came again and again in different forms, different tones, but always with the same meaning. At first, I laughed it off, pretended it didn't matter, told myself we were just different. But the comparisons didn't stop. They grew sharper, more frequent, more personal. You're too emotional. He's more focused. You need to be realistic. Little by little, it stopped feeling like feedback and started feeling like a verdict. And the worst part? He never had to say anything. His presence alone was enough. Sitting at the same table, breathing the same air, I felt smaller. Less certain. Like I was already losing a competition I never signed up for. But here's the twist. It wasn't just about him being better. It was about what that made me believe about myself. Because every comparison carved something deeper inside me. A quiet conclusion that maybe I wasn't built for success. Maybe I didn't have what it takes. And once that thought enters your mind, it doesn't leave easily. There were moments I almost accepted it. Moments I thought, maybe they're right. Maybe I'm just not like him, and maybe that's the problem. But then something strange happened. The more I was compared to him, the more I started questioning the comparison itself. Because what if the problem wasn't that I was different? What if the problem was that they only understood one version of success? And once that idea started forming, everything around me began to make sense in the worst way possible. Because it wasn't just comparison anymore. It was a label. A quiet, unspoken label that slowly turned into something permanent. The difficult one. The unrealistic one. The one who won't make it. At first, they didn't say it directly. It showed up in jokes. in casual conversations with relatives, in the way my parents introduced me, always with a slight hesitation, like they didn't know how to explain me. You ever feel that? Like you're being summarized and somehow reduced at the same time? And then, over time, it stopped being subtle. You need to be more serious. You're wasting your potential. You're going to regret this. Each sentence landed harder than the last. Not loud, not explosive, but constant. Like a slow drip that never stops. And eventually, it got inside my head. Because here's the truth no one talks about. When people repeat something about you long enough, you start repeating it to yourself. I did. I started introducing myself with doubt. I started explaining my choices like they needed justification. I started shrinking my dreams before anyone else could question them. And without even realizing it, I began living like someone who was already failing. That's the dangerous part. Not the label itself, but what it does to you. It changes how you see every opportunity. Every risk feels heavier. Every mistake feels like proof. Proof that they were right all along. And there were moments, real moments, when I almost accepted it. Moments where I thought, maybe this is who I am. Maybe I'm just not enough. But here's the twist that no one saw coming. Even as that label grew louder, something inside me refused to fully believe it. Not because I was confident. Not because I had proof. But because deep down, it never felt true. And that small resistance? That quiet no. It was the only thing standing between me and becoming exactly who they said I was. And if you think the label was the worst part, it wasn't. The real damage came from the words that followed. Words that didn't just describe me, they defined me. Because once they believed I was a failure, everything I did became proof of it. Every conversation turned into a reminder. Every mistake? Amplified. Every dream? Questioned before it even existed. And the worst part, it didn't happen all at once. It built slowly, quietly, until it was everywhere. You're not thinking straight. Why would you even try that? People like you don't succeed in that field. At first, I told myself they were just being honest. Just trying to protect me. That's what families do, right? But the more I listened, the more something felt off. Because honesty doesn't feel like this. It doesn't make you shrink. It doesn't make you afraid to speak. And yet, I was. I started choosing my words carefully. Then I stopped speaking altogether. I started hiding my ideas before they could be criticized. I began editing myself, just to avoid another comment, another look, another sigh. But it didn't matter. Because even silence wasn't enough. I remember one moment so clearly, it still plays in my head like a scene I can't pause. We were sitting at the dinner table. Same setup. Same tension. I finally gathered the courage to share something I was working on. Just a small project. Nothing big. But it mattered to me. And before I could even finish, my father laughed. Not a smile. Not a joke. A laugh that cut straight through me. Is this what you're wasting your time on? The room went quiet. My mother didn't say anything. My brother just looked down, like he had seen this before. And in that moment, something inside me broke. Not loudly. Not dramatically. Just quietly. Because it wasn't just what he said. It was how easy it was for him to say it. Like my effort meant nothing. Like I meant nothing. And that's when it hit me harder than ever. This wasn't about helping me anymore. This was about tearing me down. And once you realize that, everything changes. And once I saw it for what it really was, something inside me started to crack. Not all at once. Not in a way anyone could notice. But slowly, quietly, piece by piece. At first, I tried to hold it together. I told myself I was strong enough. That their words didn't define me. That I could push through it like I always had. But the truth? Every comment left a mark. Every laugh echoed longer than it should. Every silence felt heavier than before. And then it started showing up in small ways. I hesitated before speaking, even when I knew what I wanted to say. I second-guessed simple decisions. I replayed conversations in my head over and over, wondering what I did wrong. You ever do that? Go back to a moment and wish you had just stayed quiet? Yeah, that became my normal. But it didn't stop there. Because the more I held things in, the louder everything became inside me. Doubt, fear, anger, all mixed together with nowhere to go. I smiled at the table, but broke down alone in my room. I nodded when they spoke, but questioned everything afterward. And then came the moment that scared me the most. I started believing them. Not fully, not completely, but enough. Enough to make me pause before trying. Enough to make me wonder if dreaming big was just setting myself up to fail. Enough to make me shrink, without anyone asking me to. That's the part no one talks about. When you're constantly told you're not enough, you don't just hear it. You start living it. And the worst thing? No one noticed. To them, nothing had changed. I was still quiet. Still difficult. Still not like my brother. But inside, everything was different. Everything felt unstable. Like I was losing grip on who I was and becoming someone I didn't recognize. But here's the twist that changed everything. Even as I was breaking, I was also waking up. Because somewhere between the doubt and the pain, a question started forming. And once it appeared, it refused to go away. What if this isn't me? And once that question took root, it didn't stay quiet for long. Because the more I asked myself, what if this isn't me? The harder it became to keep pretending. Pretending to agree. Pretending to fit. Pretending to live a life that never felt like mine. So one night, I made a decision. Not a loud one. Not dramatic. Just clear. I was going to say it out loud. For the first time. No filters. No hesitation. Just the truth. We were sitting at the dinner table again. Same setting. Same tension in the air. But this time, something was different. My hands were shaking, but my voice? Steady enough. I don't want that life. The words landed, and everything froze. I could feel it immediately. The shift. The silence. The attention. My father looked up slowly. My mother stopped moving. My brother leaned back, watching like he already knew what was coming. And before anyone could interrupt, I continued. I want to work in creative media. Writing. Storytelling. Building something of my own. There it was. No going back now. For a split second, nothing happened. And honestly, that was worse than shouting. Because in that silence, I realized something terrifying. They weren't surprised. They were disappointed. And then it came. A small laugh from my father. Not loud, but sharp enough to cut through everything. You're serious? That question hit harder than any insult. Not because of the words, but because of what they meant. He didn't believe me. Worse, he didn't take me seriously. And just like that, the room shifted again. The tension thickened. My mother sighed softly, like she had expected this. My brother shook his head slightly, almost amused. But here's the twist. For the first time, I didn't back down. My heart was racing. My chest felt tight. Every instinct told me to stop, to take it back, to shrink like I always did. But I didn't. Because this time, I had already crossed the line. And there was no version of me left that was willing to go back. And that's when my father's expression changed. Not dramatically. Not in a way anyone else might notice at first. But I saw it. That subtle shift from disbelief to something colder. Something sharper. He leaned back in his chair, slowly, like he was taking his time to process what I had just said. But it wasn't confusion. It wasn't curiosity. It was judgment. Pure and immediate. Creative media, he repeated, almost tasting the words like they didn't belong in our house. There was a pause. A long one. And then he smiled. Not a warm smile. Not proud. A disappointed one. "You're throwing your life away." The sentence hit harder than anything before it. Not loud. Not angry. Just certain. Like a final verdict already decided. And before I could even respond, he kept going. "Do you even understand how the real world works?" There it was. The escalation. The shift from doubt to attack. His voice wasn't raised, but it didn't need to be. Every word carried weight. Years of authority. Years of control. And suddenly, I felt like I was 12 again, small, unsure, waiting to be corrected. "You think writing stories is a career?" he continued, shaking his head slightly. "That's not ambition. That's fantasy." Fantasy. That word stayed in the air like something toxic. My chest tightened. My hands clenched under the table. I could feel the heat rising in my face, but I didn't look away. Not this time. And then came the moment that changed everything. He leaned forward. Eyes locked on mine. No hesitation. No softness. "You will fail." Just 4 words. But they landed like something permanent. Something meant to stay. The room went completely still. Even the air felt heavier. My mother didn't interrupt. My brother didn't react. It was like they had already accepted it as truth. And for a split second, I felt it too. That familiar doubt creeping back in. That voice whispering, "What if he's right?" But then something unexpected happened. Instead of breaking me, those words lit something inside me. And the moment those words left his mouth, everything escalated. Because it didn't stop with him. It never does. In families like mine, one opinion doesn't stay isolated, it spreads. Quickly. My mother was the first to react. Not loudly. Not aggressively. But in a way that somehow felt even heavier. She let out a quiet sigh, the kind that carries disappointment without needing words. Then she looked at me soft, but distant. "Harper, be realistic," she said gently. Gentle, but dismissive. That hurt in a different way. Because it sounded like concern, but felt like rejection. Like she had already decided I was making a mistake, and nothing I said could change that. Then my brother leaned forward, finally speaking. "I mean, Dad's not wrong," he said, shrugging slightly. "You've never really stuck with anything long enough to make it work." There it was. Another hit. Personal this time. And just like that, the room shifted again. It wasn't one voice anymore. It was all of them. Different tones. Same message. "You're being impulsive. You're not thinking about your future. You're going to regret this." The words started overlapping. Not shouted, but constant. Like waves hitting all at once. And suddenly, I wasn't just defending my dream. I was defending my entire identity. I tried to respond. I really did. "I've been working on this. I have a plan, but I didn't even finish. Because my father cut me off." Again. "A plan," he repeated sharply. "You don't even know what you're doing." Silence. Then tension. Then something worse. Agreement. No one defended me. Not one voice said, "Let her try." Not one person questioned him. It was like watching a decision being made, without me. And that was the moment it hit hardest. This wasn't a conversation. It was a verdict. A final one. But here's the twist. For the first time in my life, I saw it clearly. Not as pressure. Not as advice. But as fear. Not mine. Theirs. And once I saw that fear, the entire room felt different. The same table, the same people, but the energy shifted into something heavier, sharper, almost suffocating. That dinner didn't end, it stretched. Every second felt longer than it should, like time itself was watching what would happen next. No one spoke for a moment. Just the sound of utensils lightly touching plates. A fork scraping. A glass being set down too carefully. Small noises, but loud enough to fill the silence. You know that kind of silence, right? The one that isn't empty but loaded. I could feel their eyes on me. Not directly. Not openly. But present. Judging. Waiting. And then my father broke it. "You'll understand one day," he said calmly, without even looking at me. Calm, but final. That line hit differently. Not like an argument. Not like a reaction. More like a conclusion. Like he had already moved on and left me behind in the decision he made about my life. My mother nodded slightly, still avoiding my eyes. My brother went back to eating, as if the conversation was over. Just like that. And that's when it got worse. Because they acted like nothing had happened. No resolution. No discussion. No space for me to speak. Just silence and routine. Plates being cleared. Chairs moving. Life continuing as if my future had just been decided in a few sentences. I sat there frozen. Not because I didn't have anything to say, but because I realized it wouldn't matter. That was the moment the tension snapped inside me. Not loudly. Not visibly. But completely. I looked around the table, really looked this time. At my father, so sure of himself. At my mother, quietly agreeing. At my brother, already detached. And suddenly, it felt like I wasn't part of this family anymore. Like I was just there. And then came the shock I didn't expect. I stopped trying. Not in life. Not in my dreams. But in that room. I stopped needing their approval. Because in that exact moment, something became painfully clear. They were never going to give it to me. No matter what I said. No matter what I did. And once you truly realize that, something inside you changes forever. And even as I sat there, trying to process everything, one sentence kept replaying in my head. Louder than the silence. Heavier than the tension. "You will fail." It didn't fade. It didn't soften. It stayed. At first, I tried to push it away. Told myself it was just anger. Just frustration. Just another moment that would pass. But it didn't feel like that. It felt planted. Like something he wanted me to carry long after that night ended. And the worst part? It started working. Every time I imagined my future, those words showed up first. Before the dream. Before the plan. Before anything. "You will fail." Like a voice that didn't belong to me, but somehow lived inside my head. I'd picture myself trying, and then stopping. Picture myself starting, and then doubting. Picture myself speaking, and then going silent. Because what if he was right? That question hit harder than anything he actually said. And that's when it got dangerous. Because it wasn't just his voice anymore. It was mine too. Repeating it. Reinforcing it. Turning one sentence into a belief. And once a belief forms, it shapes everything. Every decision. Every risk. Every step forward. There were moments I almost gave in. Moments I thought maybe failing early would hurt less than trying and proving him right. Maybe staying small would be safer than stepping out and collapsing. But then something unexpected happened. The more I heard those words, the more they changed. Not in meaning, but in impact. At first, they felt like a warning. Then a weight. Then a fear. And then, they became a challenge. Because one night, lying there in the dark, staring at the ceiling, I heard it again. Clear. Sharp. Final. "You will fail." And for the first time, I didn't feel afraid. I felt angry. And once that anger appeared, it didn't disappear. It stayed. Quiet at first. Controlled. But alive. Because the truth was, it wasn't just one sentence. It wasn't just that one night. It was every single day after that. Every morning, I walked into the same house, knowing exactly what was waiting for me. Not a fight. Not a confrontation. Something worse. Constant criticism. Subtle, repeated, unavoidable. "You're still doing that? You haven't changed your mind yet?" You're wasting your time. Different words. Same message. Over and over again. At breakfast. In passing conversations. Even in silence. Because sometimes they didn't need to say anything. A look was enough. A sigh. A pause just a second too long. And somehow, those moments hurt more than the words. I started noticing patterns. If I stayed quiet, they assumed I had nothing to say. If I spoke up, they corrected me. If I shared progress, they dismissed it. There was no winning. And that's when it hit harder than ever. This wasn't about helping me improve. It was about reminding me, every single day, that I wasn't enough. You know what that does to a person? It wears you down. Slowly. Invisibly. Like pressure building under the surface. No explosion. Just cracks forming deeper and deeper. But here's the part no one saw. While they were trying to break my confidence, something else was happening. I was getting used to it. Not the pain. The resistance. Because every time they said I couldn't, I felt that same reaction inside me. That same quiet pushback. Small, but consistent. And the more they repeated it, the stronger that resistance became. Until one day, I realized something that changed everything. Their voices were still there, but they weren't the loudest anymore. And just when I thought I had learned how to handle the criticism, it changed form. Because my mother didn't push like my father. She didn't attack directly. She pulled. Quietly. Emotionally. Constantly. At first, it felt like concern. Like care. Like she was the only one trying to understand me. She would sit next to me, lower her voice, soften her tone. Harper, I'm just worried about you. Worried. That word hit differently. It made me pause. Made me question myself again. Because what if she was right? What if this wasn't judgment, but love? But then it continued. You're making your life harder than it needs to be. I just don't want to see you struggle. Why can't you choose something safer? Safer. Easier. Better. Each word wrapped in care, but pulling me in the same direction. Back. Always back. And that's when the tension started building again. Because it's easier to fight anger than it is to fight guilt. When my father spoke, I resisted. But when my mother spoke, I hesitated. I started feeling responsible for her emotions. Responsible for her worry. Responsible for the disappointment in her eyes that she tried so hard to hide. And slowly, without realizing it, I began carrying something heavier than doubt. Guilt. The kind that makes you question not just your choices, but your right to choose it all. I would lie awake at night thinking, what if I'm hurting them? What if I'm being selfish? What if following my dream means losing them? That thought scared me more than failure ever could. And then came the moment that hit the hardest. She looked at me one evening, eyes softer than ever, voice almost breaking. I just don't recognize you anymore. That sentence shattered something inside me. Not loud, not visible, but deep. Because suddenly, it wasn't about success or failure anymore. It was about identity. About belonging. And for a second, I almost gave in. But then, the twist. If becoming myself meant they couldn't recognize me, then maybe I had never been seen in the first place. And just when I thought I had faced the worst of it, my brother made sure I hadn't. Because unlike my parents, he didn't hide behind concern or authority. He mocked me. At first, it was subtle. A smirk when I spoke. A quiet laugh under his breath. The kind of reaction you could almost ignore if it didn't keep happening. But it did. Every time I mentioned my plans, he leaned back like he was watching a joke unfold. So, you're still doing that, he said one day, raising an eyebrow. That tone. That look. It wasn't curiosity. It was entertainment. And then it escalated. You really think people are going to pay you for this? You're not serious, right? Each sentence came with that same expression, amused, detached, superior. like he had already decided how my story would end. And the worst part? He made it sound logical, not emotional, not harsh like my father, just casually dismissive, as if my failure was obvious to anyone paying attention. That hit differently, because it didn't feel like an attack. It felt like confirmation. There were moments I caught myself hesitating before speaking, already hearing his voice in my head before he even said anything. That quiet laugh, that disbelief. And then came the moment that burned into me. He looked at me, shook his head slightly, and said, "You've always been like this. Starting things you can't finish." That sentence stayed. Not because it was loud, but because it sounded true. For a second, I felt it. That drop in my chest. That doubt pulling me down again. But then something shifted. Because this time, instead of shrinking, I saw it clearly. He wasn't seeing me. He was seeing the version of me he needed to believe in. The one that made him feel secure. The one that made him feel ahead. And once I realized that, his words lost their power. And maybe that's what pushed me over the edge, not to give up, but to prove them wrong. Because once their words started losing power, my actions started gaining meaning. I didn't announce it. I didn't argue anymore. I just started. Quietly. Consistently. Late nights in my room, laptop glowing in the dark. Fingers moving faster than my thoughts. Writing, editing, rewriting. Again and again. No applause. No validation. Just me and the work. At first, it felt small. Almost invisible. Like nothing I did really mattered. But I kept going. Because for the first time, I wasn't doing it for them. I was doing it for me. And that changed everything. Every rejection email? I read it, learned from it, moved on. Every ignored message? I sent another. Every doubt that crept in? I worked through it. Slowly, something started to shift. Not around me. Inside me. Because the more I showed up for myself, the less I needed them to believe in me. But here's where the tension hit again. Because even as I was improving, they didn't see it. Or worse, they refused to. "You're still wasting time. This isn't going anywhere." Same words. Same tone. Like nothing had changed. And for a moment, it almost broke me again. Because progress without recognition feels like failure. You start questioning everything. Wondering if all the effort is real, or just something you're telling yourself to feel better. But then came the moment that shifted everything. I got my first real response. Not from them. From someone who didn't know me. A client. "Your work is exactly what we're looking for." That sentence hit differently. Because it wasn't emotional. It wasn't biased. It was real. Objective. Earned. And in that moment, something inside me locked into place. Not confidence. Clarity. Because for the first time, I had proof. Not that I was perfect, but that I wasn't what they said I was. And once you see that, truly see it, you can't unsee it. And just when I thought that small win meant everything would finally get easier, it didn't. In fact, that's when the real failures began. Because that first opportunity, it wasn't perfect. Not even close. I remember staring at the screen, rereading the feedback over and over. Edits. Corrections. Doubts hidden between polite sentences. "This needs improvement. We expected something stronger. Can you revise this again?" Again. And again. And again. At first, I told myself this was normal. Part of the process. Growth. But each revision chipped away at that fragile confidence I had just started building. Because now, it wasn't just my family questioning me, it was the real world. And the pressure felt different. Real deadlines. Real expectations. Real consequences. No room to hide. I stayed up all night trying to fix everything. Changing words. Rewriting entire sections. Deleting, starting over, doubting every decision. My eyes burned. My head hurt. But I kept going. Because this time, failure wouldn't just prove them right. It would prove me wrong. And then it happened. The message I didn't want to see. We've decided to go in a different direction. Just one sentence. But it hit harder than anything before. I sat there, staring at it. No sound. No reaction. Just empty. Because for a second, everything they ever said came rushing back. You're wasting your time. You don't know what you're doing. You will fail. And this time, it felt real. This time, it had proof. That was the moment things almost collapsed. The moment where quitting actually made sense. Where giving up felt logical. Safe. Expected. But then, something shifted. Because instead of running from that failure, I stayed with it. I read the message again. Slower this time. Less emotional. More focused. And I saw something I missed before. It wasn't rejection. It was direction. Because hidden in that failure were answers. What didn't work? What needed to change? What I could do better? And suddenly, it wasn't the end. It was the beginning. And that's when I realized something I couldn't ignore anymore. I couldn't grow in that house. Not like this. Not with their voices louder than my own. Because every step forward I took, they pulled me 2 steps back. Every small win I earned, they erased with one sentence. And no matter how hard I tried to prove myself, I was still the same version of me in their eyes. So the question changed. It wasn't, can I succeed, anymore. It became, can I stay here and ever find out? That question stayed with me. Morning, night, in silence, in noise, until it became impossible to avoid. And then one day, I stopped overthinking. I packed a bag. Not everything. Just what I needed. Clothes. Laptop. A few things that still felt like mine. My hands were steady, but my chest felt tight. Because deep down, I knew this wasn't just leaving a house. It was leaving everything familiar. Every step toward the door felt heavier than the last. The hallway. The living room. The same walls that had watched everything. For a second, I paused. What if they were right? What if I failed out there alone? That thought hit hard. Almost enough to stop me. But then another thought came. Stronger this time. Clearer. What if staying is the real failure? And that was it. I reached for the door. Turned the handle. Opened it. No one stopped me. No one called my name. No one said, wait. That silence? That was the loudest answer I could have gotten. And as I stepped outside, something shifted instantly. Fear was still there. Uncertainty too. But for the first time in my life, so was freedom. And just when I thought I could leave quietly, I was wrong. Because before I could take another step, a voice cut through the silence. Where do you think you're going? I froze. My hand still on the door. My heart racing again. Slowly, I turned around. My father was standing there, his expression unreadable, but his eyes? Sharp. Controlled. Watching. I'm leaving, I said. Simple. Clear. No hesitation. For a second, nothing happened. And then, it started. You're not serious, he replied, his tone calm but tight. You walk out that door, don't expect to come back. There it was. The escalation. Not just rejection, a line being drawn. My mother stepped in, her voice softer but more urgent. Harper, don't do this. You're making a mistake. Just think about it for 1 second. 1 second. Like I hadn't been thinking about this for years. I have thought about it, I said, louder this time. My voice shaking but not breaking. Every single day. And then my brother laughed. Not loud. Just enough. This is exactly what I meant, he said. You don't finish things. You just run when it gets hard. That hit. Deep. For a moment, everything almost collapsed again. the doubt, the fear, the weight of everything they believed about me pressing down all at once. But then something snapped. Because this time, I wasn't the one running. "I'm not running," I said, looking straight at him. "I'm choosing silence." Real silence this time. And then my father stepped closer. Slower. More intense. "You're throwing your life away for something that won't last," he said. "And when you fail, don't come back asking for help." There it was. The final blow. The door wasn't just physical anymore. It was permanent. And for a split second, I felt it. The fear. The loneliness. The possibility that they might be right. But then I realized something. If I stayed, I had already lost. So I turned back to the door. No more words. No more explanations. And this time, I didn't stop. And just as I stepped forward, thinking it was finally over, it wasn't. Because the moment my hand tightened on the door, his voice came again, this time louder, sharper, impossible to ignore. "Then go." I stopped. Not because I wanted to, but because of how he said it. There was no hesitation. No anger left. Just cold certainty. "If you walk out," he continued, each word slow and deliberate, "you're not part of this family anymore." That sentence didn't just hit, it cut. For a second, everything around me blurred. The walls, the floor, the door in front of me, it all felt distant. Because this wasn't just leaving anymore. This was being cut off. And then it escalated even further. "Don't come back," he added. "Not when things fall apart. Not when you realize you were wrong." Final. Absolute. I turned slowly, my chest tightening, my throat dry. I searched the room, just for a second. For anything. A reaction. A hesitation. Someone to stop this. My mother looked away. My brother said nothing. No one moved. That was the moment it truly hit. I wasn't choosing to leave anymore. I was being pushed out. And somehow, that hurt even more. Because a small part of me, no matter how much I tried to bury it, still hoped they would fight for me. That they would say, "Stay." That they would choose me over being right. But they didn't. And that silence? That was the real answer. My grip on the door tightened. My heart pounded so loud I could barely hear anything else. And for one last second, I hesitated. What if this is a mistake? What if this is the moment I lose everything? But then another thought cut through the fear. What if this is the moment I finally choose myself? And just like that, something inside me locked into place. I opened the door, stepped out, and this time, no one stopped me. And just like that, I was on my own. No dramatic music. No big moment. Just me, standing outside, holding a bag, realizing there was nowhere to go back to. The night felt colder than it should have. Or maybe it was just me. Every step away from that house felt unreal, like I was watching someone else's life play out. I kept walking, not because I knew where I was going, but because stopping felt even scarier. Eventually, I found a place. Small. Cheap. Temporary. A single room with bare walls, a narrow bed, and one dim light flickering in the corner. It wasn't much. But it was mine. I dropped my bag on the floor and just stood there for a moment. Silence. Real silence. No voices. No judgment. No one watching me. And that's when it hit. Not freedom. Not relief. Loneliness. Heavy. Immediate. Unavoidable. I sat on the edge of the bed, staring at nothing. My hands still slightly shaking. My chest tight. And for the first time since I walked out, I let myself feel everything. What if they were right? That question came back stronger than ever. Louder. Clearer. Now there was no one else to blame. No one to argue with. Just me and the reality I had chosen. Tears came before I could stop them. Quiet at first. Then harder. Not because I missed the house, but because I felt the weight of everything I had just lost. Family, safety, certainty, all gone. And in that moment, it didn't feel like strength. It felt like a mistake. That was the lowest point. The moment where turning back would have been easier, where giving up would have made sense. But then, something unexpected happened. I looked around that small, empty room again. Really looked this time. No pressure. No expectations. No one telling me who I had to be. Just space. And, for the first time, possibility. Because as terrifying as it felt, there was no one left to stop me. And that possibility came with a price I wasn't ready for. Because the moment freedom became real, so did survival. The next morning hit differently. No routine. No structure. No one telling me what to do, but also, no one supporting me if I failed. Just me, a nearly empty wallet, and a reality that didn't care about my dreams. I started counting everything. Every dollar. Every meal. Every decision. Coffee? Too expensive. Takeout? Impossible. Even basic groceries felt like a calculation. Days blurred together fast. I woke up early, not out of discipline, but anxiety. Checking my phone. Emails. Messages. Nothing. Then again. And again. Silence. And then the pressure kicked in. Bills. Rent. Deadlines I created for myself just to stay sane. I took whatever I could find. Small gigs. Low-paying work. Writing for almost nothing. Editing for people who barely responded. I told myself it was temporary. But temporary started to feel permanent. There were days I skipped meals without even realizing it. Nights where I stared at my bank account, refreshing the screen like the number might magically change. It didn't. And then came the moment that broke me. I stood in a grocery store, holding 2 items in my hands, and had to choose one. Just one. That was it. That was the reality. I remember putting one back on the shelf, slowly, like it meant more than it should. Because it did. It meant I couldn't afford both. It meant I wasn't almost okay. I was struggling. Really struggling. And for a second, everything they said came rushing back again. Louder. Stronger. You're wasting your life. You don't understand the real world. You will fail. This time, it felt true. This time, it felt undeniable. But then, something inside me reacted. Not loudly. Not dramatically. Just a quiet refusal. Because standing there, holding that one item, I realized something brutal. Yes, this was hard. Yes, I was struggling. But this was still my choice. And once I accepted that, I stopped waiting for something big to save me. No breakthrough. No miracle. Just work. Any work. Every small opportunity one could find, I took it. I became everything at once. Writer. Editor. Social media manager. Content assistant. Even things I had never planned to do. If it paid even a little, I said yes. Mornings blurred into afternoons. Afternoons into nights. My laptop was always open. Tabs everywhere. Messages unanswered. Deadlines stacked on top of each other. I told myself this was temporary. But it didn't feel temporary. It felt endless. One client wanted revisions at midnight. Another disappeared without paying. Some jobs paid so little it almost felt insulting, but I still did them. Because almost nothing was still something. And then it escalated. I started taking on more than I could handle. Saying yes before thinking. Working while exhausted. Skipping breaks. Ignoring the way my body was slowing down. Because stopping felt dangerous. Stopping meant thinking. And thinking meant doubt. There were moments I stared at my screen, completely blank, unable to write a single word. My mind would freeze, my chest tightening, that same voice creeping back in, "You can't do this." And, for a second, It almost won. But then something shifted. Again. Because I realized something brutal in those moments. No one was coming. No one was going to rescue me. No one was going to suddenly believe in me, support me, or make this easier. It was just me. And that realization? It hurt, but it also freed me. Because if it was just me, then I was enough to keep going. So I pushed through. One task at a time. One small job after another. No spotlight. No recognition. Just quiet progress that no one saw. And that's when it hit me. These small jobs? They weren't small. They were building something. And just when I started to believe those small steps were building something, the rejections came harder than ever. Not once. Not twice. But constantly. Every email I sent felt like a shot in the dark. Every application, every pitch, every message carried hope for a few seconds. And then nothing. Or worse. Not a good fit. We've decided to move forward with someone else. No response. Silence became the loudest answer. At first, I handled it. I told myself this was part of the process. That everyone goes through this. That it would pass. But the more it happened, the heavier it felt. Because rejection doesn't just say no. It makes you ask why. Was I not good enough? Was my work not strong enough? Or was I exactly who they said I was? That thought hit harder every time. And then it escalated. I started checking my email obsessively, refreshing over and over, waiting for anything to change. My heart would jump at every notification, only to drop seconds later. Again, and again, and again. It became a pattern. Hope, silence, disappointment. Repeated so many times, it started to feel permanent. And then came the moment that nearly broke me. I spent days, real days, working on one project pitch. Researching, writing, rewriting, making it perfect. Or at least, as close to perfect as I could. I sent it out with everything I had left in me. And the response? A single line. We're not interested. That was it. No explanation. No feedback. No second chance. Just rejection. Something inside me dropped. Hard. Because in that moment, it didn't feel like they rejected the work. It felt like they rejected me. And for a second, just 1 second, I believed it completely. Every word my family ever said came rushing back louder than ever. You're not enough. You will fail. This time, it felt undeniable. But then right at that breaking point, something unexpected happened. Instead of stopping, I paused. Really paused. And I asked myself one question I had been avoiding this whole time. What if this isn't rejection, but repetition? Because suddenly, it clicked. Every no wasn't the end. It was training. And that realization? It didn't make it easier. But it made it possible to keep going. And even after that realization, the doubt didn't disappear. It got quieter for a moment, but then it came back. Stronger. Sharper. More personal. Because understanding rejection doesn't mean you stop feeling it. It just means you feel it and keep going anyway. But some days, that wasn't enough. Some days, I sat in that small room, staring at my screen, completely frozen. No ideas. No energy. Just that heavy, familiar voice creeping back in, what if they were right? Not loud, but constant. It showed up in the smallest moments. When I hesitated before clicking send. When I reread my own work and suddenly hated every word. When I compared myself to people who seemed so much further ahead. And then it escalated. I started questioning everything. Not just my work. My choices. My direction. My identity. Why am I even doing this? Is this really worth it? What if I'm just proving them right, slowly? Those questions didn't just sit in my mind. They circled. Repeated. Grew louder the more I tried to ignore them. And then came the moment that hit the hardest. I opened an old message thread. family messages, old conversations, old versions of me. And there it was, his voice in text this time. "You're not built for this." Reading it again, in silence, hit differently. Because now there was no argument, no reaction, just me and the possibility that it might be true. That was the breaking point. The moment where everything slowed down. Where quitting didn't feel emotional anymore. It felt logical, safe, expected. But then something shifted. Again. Because instead of asking, "What if they're right?" I asked something else. "What if I never find out?" And that question was louder than the doubt. And that question almost saved me. But not immediately. Because before it could fully take hold, I reached the point where I almost gave up. Not dramatically. Not in some big, emotional breakdown. Quietly. Dangerously quietly. It started with small thoughts. Maybe I should pause. Maybe I need a break. Maybe this just isn't the right time. Reasonable. Logical. Safe. But beneath those thoughts was something else. Surrender. I remember sitting at my desk, staring at my laptop, fingers resting on the keyboard and doing nothing. Not because I couldn't work, but because I didn't want to try anymore. Because trying meant risking more failure, more rejection, more proof that they were right. And in that moment, not trying felt easier. I opened a job listing. Something stable. Something predictable. The kind of job my family would approve of. Fixed salary. Clear path. No uncertainty. For a second, it felt like relief. No more pressure. No more doubt. No more fighting. Just normal. I hovered over the apply button. My heart slowed. My thoughts quieted. Everything inside me started settling into that decision. This was it. The exit. The safe way out. And then right before I clicked, something hit me. Hard. A memory. Not of success. Not of failure. But of that night. The door. The silence. The words, "You will fail." And suddenly, I saw it clearly. If I clicked that button, they wouldn't need to be proven right. I would do it for them. That was the shock. The realization that giving up wouldn't just end the struggle. It would confirm everything they believed about me. And for the first time, that felt worse than failing. Because failing meant I tried. But quitting? That meant I never did. My finger froze. My chest tightened again. But this time, it wasn't fear. It was clarity. I closed the tab. Slowly. Not because I was sure I would succeed, but because I wasn't ready to become the version of me they had already decided. And the moment I closed that tab, something inside me shifted in a way I couldn't ignore anymore. It wasn't loud. It wasn't dramatic. But it was final. Because for the first time, I wasn't reacting to fear. I was choosing through it. I sat there, staring at the blank screen, my reflection faintly staring back at me. Tired eyes. Messy hair. A version of me I barely recognized. And for a second, I asked myself something I had never asked before. Who am I if I stop listening to them? That question hit differently. Not like doubt. Like a reset. Because suddenly, everything I had been carrying, their voices, their expectations, their definitions of success, started to feel optional. Not gone. Not erased. But no longer in control. And that realization? That was the shock. I had been fighting them this whole time. Trying to prove them wrong. Trying to escape their version of me. But I had never stopped to build my own. And once I saw that, everything changed. Because this was never just about success. It was about identity. I stood up slowly, my body still exhausted, my mind still heavy, but clearer than it had ever been. I walked to the mirror, looked at myself, really looked this time. No labels. No comparisons. No voices. Just me. And for the first time, I didn't see a failure. I saw someone unfinished. And that difference? It meant everything. Because failure is an ending. But unfinished? That's potential. That's movement. That's something you can build on. And in that moment, something locked into place inside me. Not confidence. Not certainty. Direction. I didn't know how long it would take. I didn't know how hard it would get. But I knew one thing for sure. I wasn't going back. Not to that house. Not to that version of me. Not to that voice that told me I couldn't. Because the real shift had already happened. I stopped asking, what if I fail? And started asking, what if I become something they never expected? And once I had that direction, everything about how I worked began to change. Because this time, I wasn't chasing approval. I was chasing improvement. I went back to my work, but not the same way. Every rejection I had saved, I reopened them. Slowly. Carefully. Not as proof that I wasn't good enough, but as clues. What did they see that I didn't? That question became my focus. I studied everything. Sentence structure. Tone. Story flow. I compared my work to others, not to feel inferior, but to understand the gap. Where did they capture attention? Where did I lose it? And then I rewrote. Not once. Not twice. But over and over again. Each draft sharper than the last. Each version closer to something real. But it wasn't easy. Because improving means facing the truth. And the truth was, I wasn't as good as I thought. That realization hit hard. But instead of breaking me, it refined me. I started building routines. Writing every day. Even when I didn't feel like it. Especially when I didn't feel like it. Studying late into the night. Breaking down other people's work line by line. Obsessing over details no one else could see. And slowly, something shifted. Not in the world. In me. Because the more I practiced, the less I guessed. The less I doubted. The less I relied on motivation, and the more I relied on skill. But here's the twist. The improvement didn't feel dramatic. No big moment. No sudden breakthrough. Just quiet progress. Invisible. Until one day, it wasn't. I looked back at something I had written weeks ago and didn't recognize it. Not because it was bad, but because I had outgrown it. That was the shock. Not that I had succeeded, but that I had changed. And in that moment, I realized something powerful. I didn't need them to believe in me anymore. Because I had proof. I was becoming better. And once that improvement became real, something else followed. Slowly at first. Almost unnoticed. The first clients. Not big ones. Not impressive. Just small messages that looked like all the others until they weren't. Hey, I saw your work. Are you available for a project? Simple. Casual. But everything changed in that moment. Because this time, they weren't rejecting me. They were choosing me. The first project was small. Low pay. Tight deadline. I almost said no. Almost told myself it wasn't worth it. But something inside me stopped that thought. Say yes. So I did. And the pressure hit instantly. Because now, it wasn't about trying anymore. It was about delivering. I worked like everything depended on it. Late nights. Early mornings. Checking every sentence twice. Then 3 times. Then again. Not out of fear, but precision. And when I sent it, I waited. That familiar silence came back. Seconds felt like hours. Hours felt like days. My mind started racing again. What if it's not good enough? What if they regret choosing me? And then, the message came. This is exactly what we needed. That sentence didn't just land, it exploded. Because it wasn't hope. It was confirmation. Real. Earned. Undeniable. And then it happened again. Another client. Another message. Another project. Small wins, stacking. Quietly. Consistently. But here's the twist. It didn't feel like success. Not yet. Because the fear was still there. The doubts still whispered. The pressure didn't disappear, it grew. Because now I had something to lose. But that's when I realized something even bigger. These weren't just clients. They were proof. Proof that I wasn't invisible. Proof that I wasn't not enough. Proof that everything I had been building in silence was starting to speak for itself. And as those small wins kept stacking, something finally crossed a line. Not loud, not public, but undeniable. My first real success. It didn't come with an announcement. No celebration. Just a number on a screen that made me pause. I stared at it longer than I should have. Because for the first time, the work I had been doing in silence was enough. Enough to cover my rent. Enough to pay my bills. Enough to breathe. Just a little. That was it. That was the moment. Not millions. Not fame. Just stability. And it hit harder than anything before. Because I remembered standing in that grocery store, choosing between two items. I remembered refreshing my bank account, hoping for change that never came. I remembered every doubt, every rejection, every voice telling me I wouldn't make it. And now, I was still here. Still standing. Still building. But here's the twist. It didn't feel like victory. Not at first. Because the moment I realized I could survive, a new fear appeared. What if this doesn't last? That thought crept in instantly. Quiet. Sharp. Because now it wasn't about proving them wrong anymore. It was about not losing what I had finally built. The pressure changed. Before, I was chasing something. Now, I was protecting it. And that felt heavier in a different way. But then I stopped. Took a breath. Looked at that number again. And I realized something I almost missed. This wasn't luck. This wasn't random. This was the result of every night I didn't quit. Every rejection I pushed through. Every moment I chose to stay. And for the first time, I allowed myself to feel it. Not pride. Not relief. But something stronger. Proof. And once I had that proof, something inside me started to rebuild. Not all at once. Not perfectly. But steadily. Confidence. Not the loud kind. Not the kind that announces itself. The quiet kind. The kind that grows in the background unnoticed until one day it's there. At first, it showed up in small moments. I stopped overthinking every sentence before sending it. I stopped apologizing for my work before anyone even saw it. I stopped shrinking my ideas just to make them easier to accept. Little shifts, but powerful ones. And then it grew. I started speaking differently, with clients, with strangers, even with myself. My tone changed. My posture changed. The hesitation that used to control me, it didn't disappear, but it stopped leading. And that's when the tension came back. Because confidence doesn't erase fear. It exposes it. There were still moments my heart raced before hitting send. Still nights where doubt tried to creep back in. Still that voice whispering, don't get too comfortable. This could all fall apart. But this time, something was different. I didn't listen the same way. Because now I had something stronger than fear. Evidence. Every completed project. Every satisfied client. Every problem I had figured out on my own, it stacked up. Quietly. Solidly. And slowly, that stack became a foundation. But here's the twist. Confidence didn't come from success. It came from survival. From every moment I didn't quit when it would have been easier. From every time I kept going when nothing made sense. From choosing myself again and again, even when no one else did. That was the real shift. Because now I wasn't trying to prove anything anymore. Not to them. Not even to myself. I was just becoming. And for the first time, that felt enough. And as that quiet confidence settled in, something even deeper began to shift. Not just how I worked. Not just how I spoke. But how I thought. Because for the longest time, My mindset was built on reaction, reacting to their words, their doubts, their expectations. Even when I tried to move forward, I was still looking back. But now, that changed. I stopped asking, what do they think about this? And started asking, what do I think? That sounds simple. It wasn't. Because when you've spent years being shaped by other people's opinions, forming your own feels unfamiliar, uncomfortable, almost wrong. There were moments I caught myself hesitating again, not because I didn't know what to do, but because I was waiting for permission that would never come. And that's when it hit me. No one was coming to approve my life. That realization was sharp, but freeing, because suddenly every decision became mine. Not filtered, not adjusted, not softened to fit someone else's version of acceptable. And then the shift accelerated. Failure stopped feeling like a threat and started feeling like feedback. Rejection stopped feeling personal and started feeling directional. Even fear itself changed. It didn't disappear. It just lost control. But here's the twist. This new mindset didn't make things easier. It made them clearer. Because now there was no one left to blame. No one left to prove wrong. No external voice to hide behind. Just me. And that responsibility? It was heavy. For a moment, I felt it again. That pressure. That weight of knowing every outcome, good or bad, would come back to me. But then something shifted one more time. Because I realized that was the point. This wasn't about avoiding failure anymore. It was about owning the process. And once I saw it that way, everything aligned. I wasn't chasing success. I was building it. And once I stopped chasing success, that's when something unexpected happened. A real opportunity appeared. Not small, not temporary, big. It came through a message, just like all the others. Same notification, same sound, same screen. But something about it felt different. Hi Harper, we've been following your work. I paused. Read it again. Slower this time. And we'd like to offer you a long-term project. My heart skipped. Because this wasn't just another gig. This was the kind of project I used to dream about, the kind I thought I wasn't ready for. And instantly, the tension hit. What if this is too big? What if I can't deliver? What if this is where everything falls apart? The old voice came back. Loud. Familiar. You will fail. For a second, it almost pulled me back. That hesitation. That instinct to shrink. To say no before I could be rejected. But then something shifted. Because this time, I didn't see the opportunity as a test. I saw it as a result. A result of every late night, every rejection, every small job I said yes to when no one was watching. So instead of overthinking, I replied, yes. Simple. Direct. No apology. And just like that, everything changed. The pressure was different now. Bigger expectations. Bigger stakes. Real responsibility. There was no hiding behind small steps anymore. This was the next level. And I felt it immediately. Deadlines tighter. Feedback sharper. Standards higher. Every detail mattered more. Every mistake felt heavier. But here's the twist. I didn't break. I adapted. Because everything I had gone through before, it had prepared me for this. Every small moment I thought didn't matter, suddenly did. And for the first time, I realized something powerful. I wasn't lucky to be here. I had built my way here. And the moment I stepped into that level, the pressure didn't just increase. It multiplied. Everything felt heavier. Faster. Sharper. There was no room for guessing anymore. No space for almost good enough. Every task carried weight. Every decision mattered. And for the first time, I felt what real stakes actually meant. Deadlines weren't flexible. Expectations weren't forgiving. And mistakes? They weren't lessons anymore. They were risks. I remember staring at my screen one night, multiple tabs open, messages piling up, feedback coming in faster than I could process. My chest tightened. My thoughts scattered. For a second, everything blurred. What if this is too much? What if I pushed myself into something I can't handle? That voice again, louder than it had been in weeks. You're not ready. And this time, it almost felt true. Because the pressure wasn't theoretical anymore. It was real. Immediate. Demanding. Clients waiting. Work due. No excuses. I barely slept. My mind kept running even when my body shut down. I replayed every decision, every sentence, every detail, over and over again, looking for mistakes before anyone else could find them. And then it happened. I made one. A small one. But in that moment, it felt massive. The feedback came quickly. Direct. Sharp. This isn't what we expected. That line hit harder than anything before. Not because it was harsh, but because it was real. For a split second, everything collapsed. All the progress. All the confidence. All the proof I had built. Gone. And in that silence, the old thought returned. They were right. That was the breaking point. The moment where pressure turns into panic. Where everything you've built feels like it's slipping away. But then right in the middle of that chaos, something shifted. Because instead of reacting, I paused. Not out of fear. Out of control. I reread the feedback. Slower. Calmer. Without emotion this time. And I saw something I had missed before. It wasn't failure. It was precision. A correction. A direction. And suddenly, the pressure didn't disappear. But it changed. Because I realized something powerful in that moment. Pressure wasn't trying to break me. It was trying to refine me. And once I understood that, I stopped resisting the pressure. I leaned into it. Completely. Because if pressure was there to refine me, then the only way forward was through work. Relentless, focused, non-stop work. My days lost their structure. Morning, night, it didn't matter anymore. The only thing that mattered was progress. I woke up with tasks already running in my head, and I went to sleep with unfinished ideas still looping. Work became constant. Obsessive. Every detail mattered. Every sentence had to be sharper. Every revision faster. I pushed myself harder than ever before, not because someone told me to, but because I couldn't afford not to. And then it escalated. I stopped counting hours. Stopped tracking effort. Even stopped noticing exhaustion. There were nights I didn't remember falling asleep. Mornings where my body felt heavy, but my mind was already moving. Coffee became routine. Silence became rare. My laptop never closed. Because stopping still felt dangerous. What if I slow down and lose everything? What if this momentum disappears? That fear drove me. Pushed me further. But then came the moment that changed everything. I was staring at the screen again, another project, another deadline, and suddenly, nothing came out. No ideas. No words. Just blank. My fingers hovered over the keyboard, but this time, they didn't move. My head felt full, but empty at the same time. And for the first time in a long time, I couldn't push through it. That was the shock. Not failure. Not rejection. But exhaustion. Real. Deep. Undeniable. And in that moment, something hit me harder than any pressure ever had. Working nonstop wasn't strength. It was survival mode. And survival isn't sustainable. That realization stopped me. Completely. Because for the first time, I saw the truth I had been avoiding. If I kept going like this, I might succeed. But I would lose myself doing it. And that realization changed how I moved forward. Not slower. Smarter. Because for the first time, I wasn't just working hard, I was working with intention. Choosing better projects. setting boundaries, protecting my energy the same way I protected my progress. And that's when everything shifted again. Not gradually. Suddenly. More messages came in. Bigger ones. Clients with real budgets. Real expectations. Real respect. Can you handle a larger campaign? We'd like to expand this into a long-term partnership. I paused every time I read those words. Not out of fear this time, but disbelief. Because this wasn't what I had planned. It was more. Way more. The projects got bigger. The payments higher. The trust deeper. I wasn't just completing tasks anymore, I was leading ideas. Shaping outcomes. Making decisions that actually mattered. And then came the moment that hit harder than anything before. I checked my account again. But this time, I didn't recognize the number. Not because it was wrong, but because it was beyond anything I had imagined when I first left that house. That was the shock. Not survival. Not stability. But success, on a level I never allowed myself to expect. And for a second, everything went quiet. Because all those nights, all those rejections, all that pressure, it suddenly connected. Like pieces of something I couldn't see before. But here's the twist. It didn't feel like the end. It felt like proof of something deeper. Because this success? It wasn't luck. It wasn't timing. It was alignment. Between who I was and who I chose to become. And in that moment, I realized something I never thought I'd say. They were wrong. Completely wrong. And once I realized they were wrong, I stopped thinking small. Because up until that point, everything I built was about survival, then stability, then success. But now, it was about scale. The idea didn't come as a plan. It came as a question. What if I don't just do the work, but build something bigger than me? That thought stayed. Grew louder. Clearer. Impossible to ignore. So I started small. Again. Not a company overnight. Not a big launch. Just systems. Processes. Structure. I began organizing everything I had learned, the workflows, the clients, the patterns that worked. And then, I brought someone in. The first person wasn't perfect. Neither was I. But it changed everything. Because suddenly, I wasn't alone anymore. And that's when the tension hit. What if I fail them? What if I can't lead this? What if this all collapses, bigger than before? The risk felt different now. Heavier. Because it wasn't just about me anymore. But I moved forward anyway. One client became 2. 2 became 5. Work turned into projects. Projects turned into partnerships. I stopped just completing tasks and started building a system that could run without me in every detail. And then came the moment that shocked me. I stepped away from my laptop, and the work kept going. Messages were answered. Projects moved forward. Results delivered. Without me, that was the shift. Not just success. Ownership. Because for the first time, I didn't just have income. I had something that existed beyond my time. But here's the twist. It wasn't about money anymore. It was about impact. Because now, I wasn't just proving them wrong. I was creating opportunities for people who felt exactly like I once did. And in that moment, I realized something even bigger. I didn't just rebuild my life. I built something they could never imagine. And just when I thought I understood how far things had grown, it expanded beyond anything I expected. Because the next message didn't come from a familiar name. It came from another country. Different time zone. Different market. Different level. Hi Harper, we've reviewed your portfolio. I paused. Again. But this time, it felt bigger. Because this wasn't local anymore. This was global. At first, I questioned it. Why me? How did they even find me? Am I really ready for this level? That tension came back fast. Sharp. Familiar. But before it could take over, I remembered everything it took to get here. Every rejection. every late night, every small win that no one saw. So instead of shrinking, I stepped in. The project was different. Bigger expectations, higher standards, communication across time zones, real pressure to perform consistently, not just once, but over and over again. And I felt it immediately. Messages coming in at midnight, calls early in the morning, adjusting, adapting, learning faster than ever before. But then came the moment that changed everything. They didn't just approve the work. They expanded it. Let's scale this. That line hit harder than any compliment. Because it wasn't about liking what I did. It was about trusting me to do more. And then it happened again. Another international client. Another opportunity. Another door opening. Quietly, consistently, globally. But here's the twist. It didn't feel like I was reaching the world. It felt like the world was reaching me. Because everything I built in silence was now being seen everywhere. And as the world kept reaching me, something else began to change in a way I couldn't ignore anymore. The numbers. At first, I didn't pay attention. I was too focused on the work, the growth, the next step. Money was just a result. Something in the background. But then one day, I stopped. Really stopped. And looked. The screen in front of me didn't make sense at first. I refreshed it. Once. Twice. Again. Same number. Still there. And that's when it hit. This wasn't survival anymore. This wasn't just stability. This was something else entirely. Because the income one was earning had already passed everything I once thought was impossible. Not gradually. Not slowly. It jumped. Projects stacked. Clients multiplied. Rates increased without me even realizing it. What used to feel like a big payment now felt normal. What used to feel unreachable became my baseline. And that shift? It was overwhelming. Because with every increase, the same question came back. What if this disappears? The tension didn't leave. It evolved. Now it wasn't fear of having nothing. It was fear of losing everything. And that pressure hit differently. Sharper. Heavier. But then another realization broke through. Because I looked at everything again. Not the number this time. The process. The late nights. The rejections. The risks. The choices. The moments I didn't quit. And suddenly, it all connected. This wasn't luck. This wasn't temporary. This was built. That was the shock. Not how much I was earning, but how I earned it. And in that moment, something inside me settled. Not completely. Not perfectly. But enough. Because for the first time, I wasn't afraid of losing it anymore. I knew I could rebuild it. And once that fear finally loosened its grip, I did something I hadn't allowed myself to do in a long time. I looked back. Not to regret. Not to dwell. But to understand. I sat there in silence, the same way I used to in that small, empty room. But this time, everything felt different. The memories didn't hit as pain anymore. They came back as clarity. The house. The voices. You will fail. For a second, I could hear it all again. Clear. Sharp. Unfiltered. And the tension returned, just for a moment. Because part of me wondered, what if I had stayed? What if I had listened? That thought lingered longer than I expected. But then something shifted. Because I didn't just remember the words. I remembered the feeling. The hesitation. The fear. The version of me who almost believed them. And that's when it hit me. That version of me is gone. Not erased. Outgrown. That was the shock. Not how far I had come, but how far away I was from who I used to be. Because the girl who stood at that door, questioning everything, wouldn't even recognize the person I am now. And for the first time, I didn't feel anger toward them. I didn't feel the need to prove anything anymore. I felt distance. Clarity. Because looking back, I finally understood something I couldn't see before. They didn't define me. They revealed me. And in that moment, the past lost its power. And just when the past finally felt like it had no power over me, it reached out. Literally. My phone rang. Unknown number. I almost ignored it. Almost let it pass like every other distraction. But something quiet, something instinctive, made me pause. I answered. Harper, I froze. That voice. I hadn't heard it in so long, but I recognized it instantly. My father. For a second, I said nothing. Neither did he. Just silence stretching between us, heavy, unfamiliar, loaded with everything we never said. And then, the tension hit. Why is he calling? What does he want? Is this another lecture, another reminder of who I used to be? My grip tightened around the phone. My heart steady, but alert. I heard about you, he finally said. Simple. Careful. Not proud. Not cold. Just different. I didn't respond right away, because part of me was waiting for the judgment, for the criticism, for the tone I knew too well. But it didn't come. Instead, there was a pause. And then you've done well. That sentence landed harder than anything he had ever said before. Because it wasn't loud. It wasn't emotional. But it was real. And that was the shock. Not the call. Not the words. But the shift. Because for the first time, he wasn't speaking from control. He was speaking from distance. And, maybe, even uncertainty. But here's the twist. I didn't feel what I thought I would feel. No rush of validation. No need to hold on to his words. No urge to prove anything. I just listened. Calm. Grounded. Unmoved. Because in that moment, I realized something powerful. I didn't need this call. Not anymore. Not to feel enough. Not to feel seen. Because everything I had built had already answered every question he ever had about me. And for the first time, his voice didn't define the moment. I did. And as I kept listening, something else became impossible to ignore. It wasn't just what he said. It was how he said it. Because that voice, the same voice that once felt so certain, so absolute, had changed. Subtly, but completely. The sharpness was gone. The control softened. Even the pauses felt different, like he was choosing his words carefully instead of delivering them with certainty. And that shift? It caught me off guard. Because I remembered that voice clearly. The way it used to sound when he told me I would fail. The confidence behind it. The finality. There was no hesitation back then. No doubt. But now? I heard something else. Uncertainty. And for a moment, the tension rose again. Was this regret? Was this pride he didn't know how to express? Or was this something in between, something he couldn't fully admit? I listened closer. Not to respond. Not to react. Just to understand. And then it hit me. He wasn't speaking to the version of me he used to control. He was speaking to someone he no longer fully understood. That was the shift. The real one. Because for the first time, the power dynamic had changed. Not loudly. Not dramatically. But undeniably. And here's the twist. I didn't feel the need to take that power back. I didn't need to correct him. Or remind him of what he said before. Or make him see how wrong he was. Because I already knew. And that was enough. So I stayed calm. Steady. Present. Not as the girl he once doubted, but as the person I had become. And just as I began to understand that shift in his voice, he said something that changed everything again. We've been having some problems. I didn't respond immediately, because that sentence carried more than just words. It carried weight. The kind of weight I had never heard from him before. My father, the man who always sounded certain, controlled, untouchable, now sounded strained. Careful. Almost hesitant. And the tension rose instantly. What kind of problems? Why is he telling me this? What does he expect from me now? I stayed silent, letting him continue. The business isn't doing well, he added. Things have changed. That word, changed, hung in the air longer than anything else. Because I knew what it meant. Loss. Instability. The very things he once warned me about. And suddenly, everything flipped. The same world he told me I couldn't survive in was now affecting him. That realization hit hard. Not as satisfaction. Not as revenge. But as something more complicated. Because for a moment, I saw it clearly. The roles had shifted. The certainty he once had? Gone. The control he once held? Weakened. And now, he was the one facing uncertainty. But here's where it escalated. I didn't think it would get like this, he said quietly. That line landed heavier than anything else. Because it wasn't just about money. It was about belief. The belief he had in his own path. His own choices. The same belief he once used to judge mine. And for a second, the past and present collided. Every word he said to me, every doubt he placed on me, now reflected back at him. That was the shock. Not that they were struggling, but that life had proven something neither of us expected. But then another shift came. Because instead of feeling validated, I felt calm, grounded, clear. Because I realized something in that moment. This wasn't my victory. It was just reality. And just as I settled into that calm, he said the one thing I never expected to hear. We were wondering if you could help us. I didn't answer. Not because I didn't hear him, but because I needed a second to process what that actually meant. Help. That word echoed differently coming from him. Because this was the same man who once told me I didn't understand the real world, now asking me to guide him through it. And the tension surged instantly. Is this real? Is this genuine or just desperation? Do they actually believe in me now, or do they just need something? I could feel my grip tighten again, not on the phone this time, but on everything I had built. Because this wasn't just a request. This was a shift in power. And shifts like that are never simple. He continued, his voice quieter than before. Just advice. Maybe help us figure things out. Advice. From me. That was the shock. Not the situation. Not the struggle. But the reversal. Because the person they once dismissed was now the one they turned to. For a brief moment, something old tried to rise inside me. That urge to prove a point. To remind him of every word he said. To let him feel what I once felt. It was there. Clear. Tempting. Just beneath the surface. But then something shifted. Because I realized I didn't need that anymore. I didn't need revenge. I didn't need validation. I didn't need to win this moment. Because I already had. And that changed everything. I took a breath. Slow. Controlled. And for the first time in that entire conversation, I spoke without hesitation. Tell me what's going on. Simple. Calm. But intentional. Because this wasn't about going back. And it wasn't about settling anything from the past. This was about who I had become. But here's the twist. Helping them wasn't weakness. And it wasn't forgiveness either. It was choice. Because for the first time in my life, I wasn't reacting to them. I was responding as myself. And even as I said those words, something inside me didn't settle. It split. Because on the surface, I was calm, controlled, present. But underneath, everything started pulling in opposite directions. One part of me stayed grounded, focused. The version of me I had built, strong, clear, unaffected by the past. But the other part? It remembered. Every word, every doubt, every moment I stood there alone, being told I wasn't enough. And that tension rose fast. Why should I help them? Where was this support when I needed it? Why now, when I've already built everything on my own? The questions came sharp, relentless, and for a moment, they felt justified. Because pain doesn't disappear just because you've outgrown it. It stays, quiet, waiting. And now, it was speaking again. I could feel it in my chest. That tight pull between who I used to be and who I had become. Because helping them wasn't just a decision. It was a confrontation. With the past. With the hurt. With everything I had walked away from. And then it escalated. A thought crossed my mind, clear, direct, almost dangerous. What if I say no? That possibility sat there. Heavy. Real. Because for the first time, I had the power to walk away. Not out of fear. Not out of weakness. But by choice. And that was the shock. Not the situation. But the realization that I didn't owe them anything. That I could protect myself. That I could finally choose me, without consequences. But then another voice came in. Quieter. Stronger. Not from the past, but from who I am now. What kind of person do you want to be? That question cut through everything. Because this wasn't about them anymore. It was about me. My values. My growth. My truth. And in that moment, the conflict became clear. Not between helping them or not, but between reacting from pain or responding from strength. I took a breath. Slow. Deep. And for the first time, I understood something I had never fully seen before. Healing isn't about forgetting. It's about choosing who you become when you remember. And the moment I asked myself that question, the memories didn't just return. They flooded in. Not softly. Not gently. But all at once. I was back there again. The dinner table. The silence before the words. The way my father looked at me, not angry, just certain. Like my failure was already decided. You won't make it. That line echoed louder than anything else. And then another moment. My brother's smirk. That quiet laugh. The way he leaned back like everything I said was a joke already finished. You always quit. And then my mother, softer, but somehow heavier. Why can't you just be realistic? Each memory hit like it was happening again. The same room. The same air. The same version of me, shrinking. And the tension rose fast. Because I didn't just remember what they said. I remembered how it felt. The tightness in my chest. The way my voice disappeared. The moment I started questioning myself instead of them. And then it escalated. The night I left. The door. The silence behind me. No one stopping me. That was the loudest part. Because in that moment, I wasn't just leaving a house. I was walking away from everything that was supposed to hold me. That was the pain. Not the words. Not the doubt. But the absence. And for a second, it hit just as hard as it did back then. That was the shock. Not that it hurt, but that it still could. After everything I built, everything I became, everything I proved, it was still there. But then something shifted. Because this time, I wasn't standing in that room anymore. I was remembering it. From a distance. From strength. And suddenly, the memories didn't feel like wounds. They felt like evidence. Of what I survived. Of what I outgrew. Of what no longer had control over me. And in that moment, the pain didn't disappear. But it lost its power. And standing in that clarity, I finally understood something I had been avoiding this entire time. This moment wasn't about the past. It was about my choice. Because after everything, every word, every memory, every wound, I was no longer reacting. I was deciding. And that tension came back one last time. Two paths. Clear. Opposite. I could walk away. Protect everything I built. Close that door the same way it was once closed on me. No explanation. No guilt. Or I could step forward. Not for them. Not to fix the past. But for myself. And that decision? It wasn't easy. Because both choices were valid. Both choices made sense. Both choices came with weight. But then something shifted. Because I realized I wasn't that girl at the door anymore. I wasn't choosing from fear. I wasn't choosing from pain. I was choosing from who I had become. And that changed everything. I took a breath. Slow. Steady. Letting the past settle where it belonged, behind me, not inside me. And then I spoke. I'll help. Simple. But powerful. Because those two words didn't come from obligation. They came from control. That was the shock. Not the decision itself, but the fact that I could make it without losing myself, without reopening old wounds, without becoming that version of me again. And in that moment, something locked into place. This wasn't forgiveness. This wasn't forgetting. This was freedom. And once I made that choice, how I responded mattered just as much as the decision itself. Because this wasn't just about helping. It was about how I showed up. I didn't rush. I didn't overpromise. I didn't fall back into old patterns of trying to prove anything. Instead, I stayed steady. Tell me everything, I said calmly. Start from the beginning. My voice didn't shake. It didn't shrink. It held. And that was the first shift. Because this time, I wasn't the one being questioned. I was the one asking. They explained slowly, carefully. The business issues. The financial pressure. The uncertainty they didn't know how to handle. I listened. Not as a daughter seeking approval, but as someone who understood the situation. And then came the tension again. Because I knew I could help. But I also knew I had to set boundaries. Clear ones. I'll guide you, I said. But I won't carry everything. That line changed everything. Not harsh. Not emotional. Just defined. That was the twist. Helping didn't mean losing control. It meant leading with it. And in that moment, something powerful became clear. I wasn't stepping back into their world. I was inviting them into mine. And as I held that boundary, something shifted on the other end of the line. Not immediately. Not dramatically. But noticeably. Because for the first time, they weren't interrupting. They weren't correcting. They weren't questioning me. They were listening. Really listening. And that tension softened, just slightly. My father's voice, once so certain, now carried something unfamiliar. We didn't realize. He started, then stopped. That pause said more than any sentence. Because this wasn't about business anymore. It was about perspective. I guess we were wrong about some things, he added, quieter this time. That was the moment. The shock. Not loud. Not emotional. But undeniable. Because the man who once spoke in absolutes was now admitting uncertainty. And then my mother spoke. We thought we were protecting you. There it was. The justification. The truth. The regret. Hidden inside it. And suddenly, everything connected. Their fear. Their control. Their doubt. It was never just about me. But here's the twist. I didn't need them to say more. Because that moment was enough. And as that moment settled, I felt something even more powerful than their realization. A quiet truth. I wasn't the same person anymore. Not even close. Because the girl who once stood there, waiting for their approval, would have reacted differently. She would have held on to their words. Needed more. Wanted to hear it again. But me? I didn't. And that's when the tension rose one last time. Not from them. From within. Because I noticed it clearly, the absence of something that used to control me. The need to be seen. The need to be validated. The need to prove. It was gone. And that felt unfamiliar. Almost strange. But then something shifted. Because I realized this wasn't emptiness. It was freedom. That was the shock. Not who they had become, but who I had become without even noticing. Because I wasn't speaking to them as the daughter they once doubted. I was speaking as someone who had already defined herself. And here's the twist. I didn't need to remind them of that. I didn't need to show it. They could hear it. In my voice. In my calm. In my silence. And in that moment, I knew. I had already moved on. And as I stood in that quiet certainty, I finally understood what all of this had really been about. Not proving them wrong. Not making them regret anything. But something deeper. Because for so long, I thought revenge meant watching them realize their mistake. Seeing their expressions change. Hearing them say the words I once needed. But now, that didn't matter anymore. And that realization carried a different kind of weight. Because the tension I held onto for so long started to dissolve. Slowly. Naturally. Until it was gone. And in its place, there was something else. Peace. That was the twist. The biggest one of all. Because the greatest revenge wasn't hurting them back. It wasn't proving them wrong. It wasn't even their apology. It was becoming someone who no longer needed any of it. Someone who built a life so full that the past couldn't reach it anymore. And in that moment, I saw it clearly. They didn't lose me. I outgrew them. And that was something no one could ever take away. And as that truth settled deep inside me, everything finally became quiet. Not empty. Not lonely. But full. Because for the first time, I wasn't carrying the past with me anymore. I wasn't replaying their words or chasing a version of myself they could accept. I was just living. And that shift felt unreal. Because all the tension, all the pressure, all the weight I had carried for so long, it didn't explode. It faded. Softly. Until there was nothing left to fight. That was the final release. Not a victory over them, but a return to myself. And here's the last twist. The moment I stopped trying to prove anything was the moment I became everything they said I couldn't. And now, I want to ask you something. Because this story, it's not just mine. At some point, you felt it too. The doubt. The pressure. The voice telling you that you're not enough. So here's the real question. What would you do if the people who once doubted you suddenly came back? Would you walk away? Or would you help them? Take a second. Really think about it. Because that choice, it says more about you than anything they ever said about you. And here's the twist. There's no perfect answer. Only your answer. So tell me in the comments. If you were in my place, what would you choose? And before you scroll, I want you to go even deeper with this. Because this isn't just a simple choice. It's personal. Think about that one moment in your life when someone doubted you so much it almost became your truth. You felt it, right? That hesitation. That silence. That question in your own mind, what if they're right? Now imagine this. One day, you prove them wrong. Completely. And then, they come back. Not to judge, but to ask for your help. Pause there. Feel that. Because this is where it gets real. Would you help because you've grown? Or would you walk away because you remember? Here's the twist. Whatever answer you feel right now, it reveals who you are today. So be honest. Drop your answer below. Are you choosing growth or closure? And if you're still here, then I know something. This story didn't just entertain you. It touched something real. Because maybe you didn't get kicked out of a house, but you were pushed aside. Maybe no one said it out loud, but you felt it. That moment when you realized you were on your own. And that tension? It stays with you. Long after the words are gone. Long after the people leave. It shows up in your doubts. In your silence. In the way you question yourself when no one's watching. But here's the truth. If you felt that, then you also have something powerful inside you. Because people who've been broken like that don't just survive. They rebuild. Stronger. Smarter. Unstoppable. And here's the twist. The pain you thought would destroy you might be the exact reason you become everything they never expected.